Hello! This module brings together a few of the ideas from the previous modules, helping us understand the goal of the staffing process and how individual differences relate to that goal. The main theme is performance. When we talk about performance in work settings, we're talking about actions or behaviors that are related to organizational goals and within the control of the individual, the employee. Each of the three components of that definition helps us understand what we need to think about when we're considering an individual's behavior. We'll talk more about measuring performance in the next module, but for now, we can note that the fact that we're talking about actions or behaviors means that performance is measurable. We can observe it and quantify those observations. To be considered aspects of performance, though, we need to be observing something within the control of the individual. For example, if we say we're measuring the performance of someone waiting tables at a restaurant, but measure the average amount of time it takes a table to receive food, we're not measuring something that's within the control of the person waiting the table. We're probably measuring performance of the kitchen staff. The third thing to keep in mind is that the behavior also needs to be related to organizational goals. That means the performance of the same job might require different behaviors in different types of organizations. IO Psychology talks about a number of types of job performance, with the four noted in the slide being the more commonly referenced. You might remember seeing me mention task performance when we discussed good work. Task performance is the behaviors related to the job, which is different than good work. I tend to describe good work as how we feel about those tasks. Contextual performance is the behaviors that contribute to the work environment and culture. If we don't like our task performance or don't think it allows for good work, we might craft our job in a way that involves higher levels of contextual performance to achieve good work in another way. Adaptive performance is somewhat different than those concepts, as is expert performance. As you might have guessed from the terms, adaptive performance involves flexibility when change is needed, while expert performance requires expertise, defined as at least 10 years of deliberate practice, averaging at least 4 hours a day. In some cases, employees are also intentionally behaving in a way that creates a threat for the organizations or its employees, a pattern we refer to as counterproductive behavior or counterproductive performance. The primary focus in organizations tends to be on task performance, though, and I'm tempted to say fortunately. Campbell identified 8 possible components that could be required for a job. The idea is that an individual's task-related behaviors can be the result of as many as 8 things. Going along with the idea that performance is related to organizational goals, only 3 of those 8 things are common to all jobs: task proficiency, effort, and personal discipline. The other 5 components might not be relevant for a particular job or a particular organization. For example, facilitating peer and team performance might not be relevant for a plumber. So, what influences behavior in work settings? What influences performance? It might not be a surprise to see that Campbell emphasizes a number of the same individual difference variables we learned about in the last module. He differentiates between 2 types of knowledge: knowing about something and knowing how to do something, labeled declarative knowledge and procedural knowledge. According to his model, those types of knowledge are each associated with the number of individual difference characteristics, and are also influenced by other characteristics, such as personality, ability, and experiences, including education or training. Notice, too, the role of motivation in this model. Each part's multiplied by others, so if an individual is not motivated to perform the job, knowledge doesn't matter. We'll learn more about what influences motivation in a few weeks. At this point, you might be wondering how we know what knowledge is needed and how we know what the other individual difference characteristics are that are necessary to perform the job. That's where job analysis comes in. The definition of a job analysis is fairly simple. It's a systematic examination of what's accomplished and how it's accomplished. The what refers to the important tasks of the job. The how refers to how the tasks are carried out, as well as the attributes necessary to carry out those tasks. The analysis informs a number of other processes in the organization, each of which relates to performance. For example, job descriptions are based on the analysis, so it helps potential employees know what they need to do to be able to perform the job, and lets current employees know what's expected. Performance management and evaluation should also be based on the analysis, because it details what performance is. The job analysis also informs training programs so the organization can help improve performance. I mentioned the job of a firefighter as an example of why it's helpful to think about specific individual differences rather than general characteristics in the earlier module. The job analysis is essential to understand what individual difference characteristics are actually needed and at what level. For example, in the Individual Differences chapter, the book mentions that the stairway climb test requires climbing 3 flights of stairs 7 times, each time with a different piece of equipment weighing between 25 and 55 pounds. That requires a type of strength that might be more challenging for women to achieve because of the influence of body structure and hormones. The question then is whether a firefighter really needs to be able to do that. Is it common for them to have to climb 3 flights of stairs, or are most structures single story? Do they typically need all 7 pieces of that equipment? The job analysis helps us answer questions like that to avoid criteria that discriminate against particular groups. So, how do we go about gathering that information? The process is similar to conducting a descriptive research study. It involves identifying ways to measure what the job includes and analyzing those measures. The process can take a number of forms, depending on part and whether the job is currently being performed. The chapter in the textbook explains each of the processes in this slide, so I won't go into much detail. But I do want to point out that the phrase critical incident can be a little confusing. In this case, critical is used to mean essential or important, not negative or life-threatening. Interviews and other forms of data collection involve people known as subject matter experts, or SMEs. They're individuals who are highly familiar with the job and can provide information about what it entails. In many cases, they're employees doing the job, but they might also be a supervisor, individuals who do related jobs, or others who interact with the person in the job. The process can also come from 2 perspectives, a task-oriented perspective or a worker-oriented perspective. The task-oriented perspective can be a little easier to accomplish, as we can see what's being done and the results of that behavior. That approach might not be helpful in environments where the job tasks change, though, or when the job doesn't include a specific set of tasks that are repeated at regular intervals. In those cases, the general description of behavior that results from a worker-oriented perspective might be more practical. If we think about how job analysis helps us understand performance, it helps bring together the other ideas from the unit. The goal of job analysis is to determine what someone needs to do in order to do a job. In other words, what they need to do to perform. When we refer to performance, we're talking about behaviors that are relevant to the organization. Those behaviors can be categorized as being a number of different types, depending on which model or theory we're looking at. Whether or not a person can and does perform at a job is influenced by a number of individual difference characteristics, as well as their motivation. So the analysis might identify the characteristics a person needs to be able to do the job, and assessments might show a person has those characteristics, but it doesn't necessarily mean they'll perform well.